The moment before the storm, Sydney Sweeney sat in the far corner of the makeup trailer, her hands pressed tightly between her knees, trying to keep them from shaking. Outside, the sun had already begun its slow crawl across the studio lot, casting long shadows that crawled toward her feet. Her call time had passed 30 minutes ago, but no one had come looking for her yet. Maybe they thought she was already on set. Maybe they didn't care. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, barely recognizing the tired face looking back. The bags under her eyes told stories of sleepless nights. Her lips were dry from nerves, and her cheeks no longer carried that excited glow she once had. This wasn't how it was supposed to feel. Not after all the years of dreaming. Not after the auditions, the tears, the late nights memorizing lines in tiny apartments. Not after she'd made it all the way here, but something had changed. She didn't know when exactly it had started. Maybe it was after the third rewrite of the script, when her role had been cut down to a few emotional bursts and long silences. Maybe it was the way the director stopped giving her notes, just waving a hand as if to say whatever.
Maybe.
It was the look the producer gave her yesterday. It's the one that said she was replaceable, and maybe... The worst part was that she was starting to believe it. She reached into her small tote bag and pulled out her phone. The message to her agent was already typed up. She had written it 3 times in the past 2 weeks, but never pressed send. This time, the words felt heavier. I think I'm done. I need to step away for a while. Her thumb hovered over the send button. She took a deep breath, her finger trembling. She knew once she pressed it, there would be no going back. A soft knock on the trailer door startled her. Sydney. The voice was calm, gentle, but familiar. You okay in there? She froze. It was Keanu. Of all the people on set, he was. The last one she expected. He wasn't just the star of the film, he was the name, the legend. The one who somehow walked through every room like he was both invisible and unforgettable. Quiet, respectful, always kind. People said he was the heart of the crew. But Sydney hadn't spoken much to him. She was too shy, too scared of saying. The wrong thing, she quickly put her phone away and wiped her eyes. Yeah, she said, her voice small and dry. Just needed a minute. There was a pause. Then his voice again, softer this time. Can I come in? She hesitated, then opened the door slowly. Keanu stood there in a simple gray t-shirt and jeans, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. No cameras, no assistants, just him. He gave a small smile and held out a cup. This one's got extra cinnamon, he said. I said you like it that way. She took it, unsure how he even knew that. He stepped inside, closed the door gently behind him, and sat down on the bench opposite her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. He didn't look at her like she was broken. He didn't ask her. What was wrong? He just sat there, sipping his coffee like the world wasn't rushing by outside. Finally, he looked at her. Not through her. Not past her. At her. I know that look, he said. She blinked. Not understanding. That look, he continued. Like you're carrying something so heavy, it feels easier to just drop it and walk away. She felt her throat tighten. She didn't want to cry, not in front of him. How do you know? She asked. Keanu leaned back slightly, thoughtful. Because I've been there, he said. More than once. She didn't believe him at first. How could someone like him feel like quitting? But his eyes were calm, deep, like he wasn't just saying it to make her feel better. There was a film, he said, years ago. I gave everything to it. The director changed halfway through, the script got rewritten, and by the time we finished, it wasn't even my story anymore. Critics said I looked lost on screen. He paused, looking down at his cup. I almost walked away from acting after that. Sydney sat still, listening. It's not because she felt she had to, but because his words filled the quiet in a way that made her feel understood. What stopped you? She asked. Keanu looked up. Someone asked me one question, he said. She waited, heart pounding. They asked me, said quietly, is this really the end or just the middle of your story? The words hit her like a wave. Not because they were poetic, but because they were honest. You don't have to answer now, Keanu said, but maybe ask yourself that just once. She looked at him, unsure what to say. So she just nodded. Keanu stood up gently, tapped the coffee cup in her hand. "Drink it before it gets cold," he smiled. He walked to the door, opened it, and stepped into the light. Before he closed it behind him, he turned back and said one last thing. "You belong here, Sydney. Even if today makes you feel like you don't." Then he was gone. She sat there in silence, her heart full of noise. Her phone buzzed. It was still in her bag. The message was still on the screen. She stared at it. Her finger hovered again. Then slowly she pressed backspace and erased every word. The choice she didn't know she Madison sat in her trailer long after Keanu had left. Her coffee was now lukewarm, but she still held it tightly in her hands. She didn't drink it. Not yet. It had become more than just a drink now. It was a reminder, a symbol, a small gesture, from someone who saw what no one else seemed to notice. The silence inside the trailer felt different now. It wasn't empty, it was full of questions. Some she had buried for months, some she didn't want to face. But now, she couldn't ignore them anymore. Was she giving up too soon? Or had she already given up, without even saying the words out? Loud. Outside, she could hear the sound of crew members moving lights, calling for stand-ins, adjusting equipment. The world kept moving. It didn't stop just because she was struggling. And maybe that was the hardest part. Feeling like you're the only one who's lost, while everyone else knows where they're going. A soft knock on the door broke her thoughts again. "Sydney, they're ready for you on set." She stood slowly. Her legs felt heavy, but she moved. Maybe she wasn't ready, but she could still show up. When she arrived on set, the scene was already blocked. Extras stood in their places. The assistant director gave quick instructions. The lighting team adjusted the overhead rig. And in the middle of it all stood Keanu talking softly with the director, listening more than he spoke. He noticed her the moment she walked in. He didn't wave or nod, just gave her a small, calm smile, the kind that said, "You're here. That's enough." The director looked up. "Okay, Sydney, this scene's simple. You come through the door, stop by the mirror, realize what you've lost, and then sit on the bed. The rest will be close up. Just follow your instincts." She nodded, even though her throat felt tight again. This was the kind of scene she used to love. Full of emotion, silence, internal struggle. The kind that wasn't about dialogue, but about feeling. "We're rolling in 2 minutes." The assistant director called out. Keanu walked over to her, slow and relaxed, as if the chaos around them didn't exist. "You good?" he asked. She shrugged, unsure. He leaned in just enough so only she could hear. "It doesn't have to be perfect," he whispered. "It just has to be honest." She nodded. Somehow that gave her the courage she needed. When the cameras rolled, something changed. She stepped through the door on cue, just like they rehearsed. But instead of acting like the character had lost everything, she felt it. Not as a performance, but as a truth. She stood in front of the mirror, and for a second, she wasn't playing a role. She was looking at herself, the girl who once believed in her own voice, who used to wake up excited to tell stories, who felt invisible these past few weeks but still hadn't disappeared. And when she sat down on the bed, something raw poured out of her. She didn't cry on cue. She didn't fake a reaction. It just happened. Her hands shook, her jaw clenched. Her eyes filled with tears, not because it was written in the script, but because it was real. "Cut," the director said after a long pause. His voice was quieter than usual. No one moved right away. Then someone clapped. Just one, crew member at first, then another, then the whole room. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was real. Sydney looked up, surprised. Even the director was nodding, slightly stunned. Keanu stood at the edge of the set, arms crossed, watching her not with pride, but with calm respect, like he always knew it was in her, like he was just waiting for her to see it too. Afterward, she returned to her trailer. This time, her legs didn't feel heavy. She wasn't sure what had just happened. Maybe it was just one good take. Maybe. Tomorrow, she would doubt herself again. But for now, she felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. She felt present. A few hours later, someone knocked again. "Come in," she called. Keanu stepped in, holding a small folded paper in his hand. "I didn't want to interrupt," he said, "but I wanted to give you this." Handed it to her and didn't explain. She unfolded it. It was a quote printed in small, simple font. "You are not too much. You were never too little. You're exactly enough." She looked up. "You giving me this?" Keanu smiled gently. "Because someone once gave it to me. I promised to pass it on when I met someone who needed it more." Sydney stared at the paper, heart full, eyes wide. "Thank you," she whispered. Keanu nodded and started to leave, then paused at the door. "Also," he said, "you crushed that scene today." Sydney laughed a little, not because she was confident now, but because maybe, just maybe, she was starting to remember why she loved this. After he left, she taped the paper on the wall of her trailer. Then she took a sip of the coffee from earlier. It was cold now, but it still tasted like cinnamon. Whispers between Takesti next morning, Sydney woke up before her alarm. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel the usual pit in her stomach. It wasn't gone completely, but it had shifted like the weight had moved to a place she could carry without it crushing her. She sat up in bed, rubbed her eyes, and looked at the folded piece of paper still pinned beside her mirror. "You are not too much. You were never too little. You were exactly enough." She read it again, slowly. Then she stood up, got dressed, and headed out early. The set was quiet when she arrived. Only a few crew members were prepping equipment. Even the makeup team hadn't arrived yet. She liked this hour. It felt like a moment stolen from the day before the noise took over. She sat on a wooden bench near the soundstage and closed her eyes. The air smelled like dust and coffee. The quiet hum of machines made it feel like the set itself was breathing. Then she heard footsteps. "You always get here this early?" Keanu's voice was warm, like sunlight slipping through clouds. She opened her eyes to see him walking toward her, holding 2 paper cups again. "I figured you might want the cinnamon." "One again," he said. She smiled. "How do you always remember?" "I listen," he said simply. "It helps." They sat on the bench together, sipping in silence. This kind of quiet wasn't awkward. It was easy. The world slowed down just for a minute so they could catch up. "That scene yesterday," she said softly. "I don't know what happened." "You stopped performing," Keanu said. "You started feeling—" Sydney nodded. "I didn't even try. It just came out, because it was already inside you," he said. "You just stopped trying to control it." She looked at him, thoughtful. "Do you ever feel like you don't belong? Like you're on a set and everyone else has a purpose, except you?" Keanu didn't answer right away. He took a slow breath and stared ahead. "More times than I can count," he said. She was surprised. "Really?" He nodded. "Even after all these years, there are days I wonder if people keep me around out of habit." That stunned her.
Ow.
That idea that someone like him, calm, respected, admired, could feel invisible too. "So what do you do?" she asked. "I remember that belonging isn't something people hand you," he said. "You claim it quietly. Every day. Not with ego. Not with noise. Just by showing up, listening, and being real." They sat there for a while longer, just 2 people trying to make sense of the same storm in different boats. A call came through. The loudspeaker. "Scene 3 begins in 10. All cast to set." They both stood up as they walked back toward the studio. Sydney felt something shift. Not in the world, in herself. It's like a small piece of armor had cracked, and something softer, stronger had taken its place. That day's scene was intense. Sydney's character had to confront someone she once trusted. There were no explosions, no music, just 2 people in a room, 1 apology, and 1 long silence. It was the kind of scene that depended on truth more than technique. As they rehearsed, Sydney struggled to find the right emotion. She tried tears. She tried anger. Nothing landed. The director stopped and rubbed his temple. "It's not bad," he said, "but it's not alive. Maybe let's take 5. Sydney stepped aside, her chest tight again. The old voice returned, the one that whispered, "You're not good enough." She sat on the edge of a prop chair and stared at the floor. Then Keanu sat beside her. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, quietly, he asked, "What's your biggest fear?" She looked at him right now. He nodded. She exhaled. "That I'll mess this up so badly they'll never ask me back." Keanu nodded, accepting that without judgment. "Okay," he said. "What's your second biggest fear?" That surprised her. She thought for a moment, "That I'll never get to tell the kind of stories I care about." Keanu leaned forward slightly, then let that second fear speak louder than the first one. She blinked. "What do you mean?" "We'll always be there," he said. "But you get to choose which one you listen to." Something clicked inside her. Not like a loud revelation, but like a quiet shift in focus. Her heartbeat slowed. Her breath evened out. She stood up. "Okay," she whispered, when the cameras rolled again. She didn't try to act like someone heartbroken. She remembered the fear of being overlooked, the ache of feeling like her voice didn't matter. For the first time, she let that truth spill out without hiding it behind technique. This time, no one said cut right away. When it was over, even the director was quiet then. Slowly, he said, "That was it?" Later that day, the makeup artist leaned over to her and whispered, "That was beautiful. I cried behind the monitor." Sydney smiled, grateful, but the moment that stayed with her most came later after the set had wrapped and the crew was packing up. Keanu passed by her, gave a small nod, and said just 4 words, "You made it real." Then he walked away. She stood there alone, holding those words like a gift, because for the first time in a long time, she believed them. The light behind the curtained sky outside the studio was painted with soft orange clouds when Sydney walked out that evening. She felt different, lighter, but not because the day had been perfect. It hadn't. There were still rough takes. She still forgot a line. She still stumbled over a mark. But something inside her had shifted. For the first time in weeks, she didn't go home replaying every mistake in her mind. As she walked across the lot, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned and saw Keanu, his backpack slung over one shoulder, walking the same direction, heading out. He asked. She nodded. "You too?" "Yeah, figured I'd actually eat dinner tonight." They walked side by side toward the parking lot. Neither of them rushed. It was quiet, peaceful in a way that made her wish the moment would stretch just a little longer. "You know," she said softly, "when I first got this role, I was terrified of working with you." Keanu smiled gently. "Why?" "Because you, calm, respected, like everyone trusts you to hold the whole set together." He let out a quiet laugh, just trying not to trip over a cable. She laughed too, then stopped. "But I thought I'd have to impress you, or prove myself. I didn't think you'd notice someone like me." He turned toward her and slowed his pace. "That's the problem," he said. "We're trained to think we need to be louder to be seen. Oh, but sometimes the quietest people are the ones carrying the deepest stories." Sydney looked at him, her eyes soft. "Do you ever feel tired of it? Of always being the one people expect to hold everything together?" Keanu paused before answering. "Yes," he said, "but I don't carry it alone anymore. I've learned that sharing the weight doesn't make you weak. It makes you last longer." The next morning brought a different kind of challenge. The studio had arranged a press visit, journalists, cameras, behind-the-scenes interviews. There was a new energy on set, but not all of it felt good. There was pressure in the air. Invisible, but heavy. Sydney's publicist pulled her aside as soon as she arrived. "Just a heads up. They're expecting you to talk about your journey to this role," she said, using air quotes. "Be warm, be professional, and don't go too deep." Sydney nodded. Her heart was already speeding up. She wasn't good at interviews. Never had been. She always felt like she said too much or too little. Like her voice didn't land right. Like she was always one sentence away from being misunderstood. She did the interview anyway, smiling, answering questions, talking about the script. She felt like she was floating outside of herself, watching her mouth move, but not hearing her own words. Afterward, she sat in a quiet hallway, away from the cameras. She closed her eyes and leaned her head back against the wall. Then someone sat beside her, She didn't even need to open her eyes to know it was Keanu. "You handled that well?" he said. She let out a breath. "I felt like I was lying." "Were you not really just performing?" Keanu nodded. "Sometimes survival looks like performance, especially in this industry." She looked at him. "Does it get easier?" "Not always," he said, "but it gets clearer. You start to recognize what's yours and what's just noise." She thought about that. Then she asked, "What's yours, Keanu?" He was quiet for a moment. "My peace," he said. "My silence. My way of doing things slowly, even when the world wants speed. And my choice to be kind, even when it's not rewarded." Sydney looked down at her hands. "I want that too." "Then take it," he said. "Don't wait for someone to give you permission." Later that day, the director called for a scene that required deep vulnerability. Sydney's character had to stand in front of a mirror and face herself not with lines, but with emotion. No makeup, no lights hiding her flaws. Just her and the camera. She stared at her reflection, waiting for the cue, but the cue didn't come. Instead, the director's voice echoed from behind the camera. "We're not calling action. Just be there, feel it, and we'll capture whatever happens." Sydney's heartbeat thudded in her ears. She thought about the fear, the almost quitting, the quiet question Keanu had asked, "Is this really the end, or just the middle of your story?" She thought about every time she had doubted her worth. Every moment she thought being small meant being unseen, and then she let it go. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Not from pain, not from pressure, but from finally being honest with herself. The camera captured it all. No lights, no filters, no acting. After the scene, the room was silent. No one moved then. Slowly, the director stood up. That, he said, was the core of this film. Sydney didn't say anything. She didn't need to. When she walked back to her trailer, Keanu was leaning against the door. "You showed up today," he said, "not the character, you." She nodded, her throat tight. "That's harder than it looks," she whispered. He smiled. "That's why it matters." And for the first time, she believed she had something that couldn't be taken away. Not fame, not perfection, not approval, but truth. And it was enough. One scene changed everything. A week had passed since the mirror scene. Everything felt different now. But nothing had really changed. The crew still showed up early. The cameras still rolled. Makeup still powdered her face between takes. The lunch line was still too long. And yet deep inside, Sydney was standing taller. Her steps weren't rushed. Her eyes didn't look at the floor anymore. She wasn't trying to disappear. She was still scared. But she had made peace with it. Every morning, she now taped a new quote next to the first one Keanu had given her. Sometimes it was just one word. Sometimes it was a full sentence she scribbled. In her notebook during breaks, it became her ritual. Today's note said, "You are not waiting to be chosen. You already belong." As she arrived on set, the assistant director met her at the entrance. "Hey, big scene today," he said. "The one with the rooftop monologue." She nodded. She'd been thinking about that scene for days. It was the emotional peak of the film when her character had to speak out loud, everything she'd been holding in. It was raw, unfiltered, terrifying as she walked to wardrobe. She spotted Keanu by the water station talking quietly with one of the camera operators. He gave her a nod and a soft smile. She returned it. There was a new rhythm between them now. It wasn't loud. It wasn't public. It was quiet and steady, like a thread tying to people who understood the same invisible language. When the crew finished setting up the rooftop scene, they asked her to rehearse her blocking. She stood in position, felt the wind brush her hair, and looked out at the fake skyline built around her. The director called out, "You don't need to hit every word perfectly. Just speak from where you are." She took a breath and waited for the slate to clap. But it did instead. Keanu walked up the metal stairs leading to the rooftop. He wasn't in the scene. This wasn't part of the schedule. Everyone paused. He walked over to her, calm and respectful. "I asked them to give me 2 minutes," he said. She looked at him, confused but open. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket and handed it to her. "I wrote this last night," he said. "I wasn't going to share it. But something told me maybe you needed it more than I needed to keep it." She took the paper and opened it slowly. It read, "You don't need to shout to be heard. You don't need to shine to be seen. You don't need to be perfect to be loved. Just show up. Just be here. You are enough." Sydney's throat tightened. She looked up at him. "Why do you keep giving me these?" He shrugged, a gentle smile on his lips. "'Cause someone once gave them to me, and they saved me." She folded the paper and held it close to her chest. Keanu nodded once, then walked back down the stairs. The slate clapped. Scene 23. Rooftop monologue. Take 1. She stood alone, no partner in the scene, no music, no backup, just her voice, and for once she didn't rush. She didn't force the emotion, she just breathed. Then she began, "I don't want to be quiet anymore. Not because I want to scream, not because I want to be the loudest, but because I'm tired of hiding behind the silence." She paused, the wind catching her hair. "I'm tired of pretending I don't feel things deeply, laughing when I want to cry, of apologizing just for existing." Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. "I spent so long trying to make myself small enough to fit into someone else's story. But today I'm writing my own." Long silence followed. Then from below the rooftop, the crew broke into applause, not because it was part of the script, not because they were told to, but because they had felt it, the truth. The director climbed the stairs, his eyes damp. That, he said quietly, wasn't a performance. That was a gift. Later in the editing bay, the editor called the director. "I don't know what she did in that scene," he said, "but every time I play it, I stop breathing." And that's how word began to spread. About one scene. About one actress who nearly quit. About a voice that had once been quiet but refused to be ignored. That night, Sydney sat alone in her trailer. She looked at the note Keanu gave her, then placed it on the wall with the others. She didn't cry, she didn't smile either. She just breathed, slow, steady. Present, then there was a knock. Sydney. It was Keanu again. "Come in," she said. He opened the door, stepped inside, and looked around at the notes covering her wall. He smiled softly. "Looks like your heart's been speaking." She nodded. "It's about time I listened." He reached into his pocket and took out a small, worn notebook. "I want you to have this," he said. She looked surprised. "Is this yours?"
Was
"Mine," he corrected. "Now it's yours. Blank pages. Fill them however you want."
Sydney opened it.
Every page was clean, untouched. "Thank you," she whispered. Keanu gave a small nod. Then, as he stepped outside, he turned back and asked, "You remember that question I asked you the first day?" She nodded. "Is this the end or just the middle of your story?" He smiled. "I think you answered it." She didn't need the spotlights. She found her voice. Their filming moved faster now. The filming moved faster now, but not because the crew rushed. It was because something had shifted in the energy. Scenes flowed smoother. The actors were more in sync. And Sydney, once unsure and almost invisible, was now one of the quiet centers of the set. She didn't talk more. She didn't become louder or flashier. She didn't try to become anyone else, but people noticed her because she had learned how to be there fully, deeply, without needing to prove anything. On the last day of shooting, the studio arranged a small rap gathering. This wasn't a party, just a quiet celebration in the open courtyard behind the main stage. Tables with coffee and snacks, folding chairs, few speeches. The sun was starting to set as the director stood in front of the team. "This film wasn't just a story on paper," he said. "It became something alive because of the people who brought truth to it. And sometimes that truth came quietly, not with fanfare, not with noise, just honesty. This project wouldn't be what it is without Sydney. Sweeney, she taught all of us that silence can be powerful, and that you don't need to push to be seen. You just need to show up as yourself." People clapped. Not out of politeness, Out of respect, Sydney sat at the edge of the crowd, her hands resting on the notebook Keanu had given her. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. She simply bowed her head in gratitude. After the gathering ended, crew members and cast came. Up to hug her, shake her hand, thank her, one makeup artist whispered. "You reminded me why I started this job." An assistant camera operator said, "You changed the way we all watch the monitor." She didn't know how to respond. So she smiled, and that was enough. Keanu found her near the soundstage later that evening. The sun was almost gone. The air was cooler now. "You ready to say goodbye?" he asked. She shrugged. "To this set, maybe, but not to what it gave me." He nodded. "You're carrying it with you. That's what matters." He stood in silence for a moment. Then he said, "Can I ask you something?" She turned toward him. "Sure." "That first day," he said, "when you almost quit. What were you thinking exactly?" Sydney looked at the ground. Her voice was soft. "I thought it didn't matter, that no one would notice if I disappeared." Wano looked at her with calm eyes. "And now," she smiled, "now I know I matter even when no one is looking." He stepped forward and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "That," he said, "is a kind of strength most people spend a lifetime chasing." She didn't respond. But she felt the truth in his words settle deep inside her. As he turned to walk away, she stopped him. "Keanu." He turned back. "Thank you," she said. "Not just for the questions, but for seeing me when I couldn't see myself." He nodded. "Keep the notebook close. It has more space for who you're becoming." Months later, when the trailer for the film dropped, people weren't talking about the action sequences or the big names. They were talking about one scene, the rooftop monologue, a critic wrote. Sydney Sweeney delivers a performance that feels less like acting and more like watching someone finally step into their truth. Viewers flooded the comments with words like real, raw, and I felt that in my bones. Her name began to trend, not because of gossip, not because of drama, but because she reminded people of something human, something honest. She was invited to interviews, panels, press tours, but this time, she wasn't afraid. In every conversation, she answered with grace. She didn't try to say the perfect thing. She just spoke with honesty. And when someone asked her, "What changed for you during that film?" she always gave the same answer. "Someone asked me a question. Not about acting, not about my role. It's just about my story." What was the question? They'd ask. She would smile and say, "Is this the end or just the middle of your story?" On her bedroom wall, beside the mirror, were still the notes she had collected, taped gently, quietly, like a silent promise to herself. And next to them sat the notebook Keanu gave her. The first page still held his message. But now, as the pages that followed were filled with memories, with quotes, with questions, and with truths, she was no longer afraid to speak, because Sydney Sweeney didn't quit. She just paused and then chose to begin again. Not to chase the spotlight, but to carry her own light soft, steady, and completely her own.